8 Annas a Tale. Dear friends, 8 Annas a Tale is a humorous short story by Hugh, a British author known for his light-hearted and witty narratives. The story revolves around a quirky marketplace in colonial India, where a merchant sells monkeys' tails, for 8 annas each. The story is set in India during British colonial rule, capturing the peculiar and sometimes absurd economic transactions of the time. The protagonist stumbles upon a strange market practice where monkey tails are being sold at 8 annas each. Curious, he investigates and discovers that the local government has placed a bounty on monkey tails as part of a public health initiative to control their population. Let's listen the story in own words of Hugh. It was 6 o'clock of a May morning and already unpleasantly warm. As Babs and I sipped our early tea under the shade of the trees near the house, we told each other quite unnecessarily that it was going to be another scorching day. Speaking for myself, I did not really mind. The hot month of May is a slack one, and I was going to spend the morning on a cool veranda with a new book. After lunch I might raise the energy to answer some letters. Jumbo, one of the dogs, was feeling lazy too and lay stretched at my feet, a shaggy and rather oversized cocker spaniel. He had always hated the heat, and unless I took him down to the river to bathe he would not stir out until the cool of evening, for he was a wise old man of 12 summers. Those were our plans at 6 in the morning, and for a hot day they were sound. Unfortunately they did not last very long, for even as we made them, fate and the jungle were decreeing that our day should be very different indeed. For me it was to be a day that is still branded across my memory. For poor old Jumbo it was to mark the end of the road. Banderwallas. Banderwallas. It was Kalu racing up through the orchards and shouting as he came. I knew at once what he was coming to tell me, another raid by the monkey men, who had already visited us twice before. As soon as Kalu had caught up with his breath I asked him where he had seen them. When he had told me I gulped down my tea and then went in to dress. This time I was really going to catch them and discourage further visits, for these are cruel devils that come armed with nets, clumsy traps and old muzzle-loading guns. The live monkeys, and they prefer them to be very young, are for export and vivisection. The ones they cannot catch in their traps are shot down for the new government reward of 8 annas a tail. Now you might well imagine that as a farmer with large orchards I should be only too happy to let these men go over the estate as often as they pleased. That, however, would be a wrong idea, because by now I have the monkey situation pretty much under control whenever any fruits are on the trees. The monkeys of course always do some damage, but this is more than offset by the help these little animals give you about the jungles. Indeed, they might even save your life, for they will often tell where a tiger or a leopard is hiding after a badly placed bullet. Besides, the business of protecting the orchards developed long ago into an exciting game which I believe is enjoyed by the monkeys just as much as by us. I play it often, for it takes me back to those early days when I was a senior member of the Black Hand and known over a whitish area as that bloody little horror with the catapult. Now, alas, most of that puerile cunning with this weapon has gone, but some of the old magic of those times still returns when I pull back an elastic. But my own accuracy is no longer important, as it is more than made up for by a little band of dusky, sure shots, eager volunteers from the kids on the estate. These young rustics know nothing of spacesuits and ray guns, and even cowboys and Indians are as yet unknown. They are thoroughly old-fashioned kids, and so content with a simple caddy and a pocketful of smooth pebbles, and the red bottoms of the monkeys in the treetops. That morning, as soon as I was dressed, I set off after the monkey men with Jumbo at my heels. We walked fast, for I was hoping to find them before they could do much damage. I was carrying a rifle while Jumbo had his old red and blue ball bulging from his mouth. Somewhere, he hoped, we should stop by water and play his favorite game. I was making for a deep and shady nullah which runs diagonally through the estate and divides it into two almost equal halves. The banks of this are lined with magnificent trees, most of them tall stately kohas carrot, which are loved by the monkeys for the cool shade of their topmost branches. So it was somewhere along here that I expected to find the monkey men at work, because this nullah is more than 3 miles long and the trees above it, home for at least 6 troops of monkeys. The estate is roughly square, so I started the search at the far northeastern corner and intended to stalk along the nullah until I found the raiders. By now the morning was really hot. There was little breeze, and even under the shade of the trees the fierce heat from the sun was unpleasant. During the rains this nullah is a raging torrent, but now the flow of water had dried up, leaving along the winding bed a series of crystal-clear pools with little fish darting above the pepper and salt of their sandy bottoms. By the side of most of these pools, at the foot of the high bank, are small ledges a foot or two wide and a few inches above the surface of the water. These are paths that have been beaten out by game and are much used at night by all kinds of animals. As the days grow warmer and the smaller pools elsewhere dry up, tigers and leopards begin to empty the banks of this nullah. For the first mile I found no sign of the raiders. Then I picked up what were almost certainly their tracks, 5 pairs of human feet, the prints fresh and over the marks of the hooves and pads left by last night's visitors. At one spot these men had stopped to rest. The ground here was littered with biddies the Indian leaf cigarette, and in one place against the bank some heavy bundles had been thrown down, one of them leaving on the sand a crisscrossed pattern like a net. If those signs had not been enough to tell me that the monkey men were not far ahead, the next pool 200 yards down the nullah left no doubt of it. The grey bodies of 2 langur monkeys lay just by the water's edge. One was dead and nearly cold, the other still lived, though its life was flowing rapidly away into a pool of blood seeping into the sand. Both bodies were peppered with red-brown spots where the shot that had brought them tumbling from the trees had slammed in. Neither of the monkeys had a tail. I had known the troop from which these monkeys came for many years and had always regarded its little members as some of my best jungle friends. In many ways this was the most useful troop of all along the whole stretch of the nullah. The ground here is tricky, beyond the banks it is covered with heavy forest and to the north rises steeply to several hundred feet. Towards the summit of this high ground are patches of open rocky scrub. These places are difficult to reach, the way up to them is over large boulders which have between them a mass of vedabit, thorns and other rampageous weeds. These hide deep crevices so completely that a false step can mean a heavy fall. End up at the bottom of one of these with a broken limb and you might never be found. All these high places are loved by leopards. They come up in the early morning to take the sun and stretch out on the flat-topped rocks. As the day gets warmer they move to some shady spot to doze away the drowsy hours until night, but although they appear to sleep one eye is always cocked towards the nullah below. Long stretches of it are laid bare from these high places and anything moving on the sandy bed can be seen plainly. It is seldom that there is not a leopard somewhere about here, and whenever one of these sneaking brutes becomes a nuisance, this is the spot I come to first. Then it was that the monkeys used to help, for if a leopard was indeed about they would tell me, sooner or later, where it was. As I looked up from the bodies of the 2 monkeys a cold anger took hold of me. The whole troop seemed to have been wiped out, for there was no sign of the others anywhere. No swaying branches up in the trees as they swung from bough to bough, and in the air were none of their usual cries as they quarreled and played above the pool. For the next 15 minutes my anger mounted and there was but one thought in my mind, to catch these men, free whatever captives they had, but that could wait until I caught them. That morning, however, I was not to catch them. Indeed, that satisfaction only came many years later when I surprised a big camp of them one morning just before dawn. But on that occasion I got them all, men, women and children, all their monkeys and all their goods and chattels. The chattels included the skins of buck, cheetal and barking deer, as well as an enormous bundle of peacock feathers. The skins and the feathers were a lucky find, for although those rascals had no license to trap I could not have touched them for the monkeys alone. All that, however, was still in the future and not known to me that morning when I set OS after finding the dead monkeys to track their killers. In the sand I could see that 2 men had stayed in the nullah while the other 3 had probably worked the banks. At 2 places they had stopped to smoke again, then, at a spot where a game path crosses the nullah, the footsteps of all 5 led away to the left and were lost on the harder surface of the track up on the bank. Now, I suspected, they were making for the river half a mile away where they would find a lot more monkeys. I was about to go after them when I noticed that Jumbo was no longer at my heels. I whistled softly to bring him up from the pool in the nullah below. He was probably there wallowing like a buffalo with his beloved ball near his nose waiting for me to come and play. But there was no time for that now, so I sent down another and more urgent whistle when he did not come up to the first one. I felt the first tinge of anxiety when a third call failed to bring him up. In a flash every other thought was swept from my mind and I raced back to the pool. Jumbo was not in sight, and when I started back the way I had come I saw none of his pug marks following mine. Now I was really worried. He was an obedient dog who without word to break would not have gone far on his own affairs. From the pool I had just left to the one where we had found the two monkeys was just over a quarter of a mile with the nullah between them shaped like the letter S. Slowly I worked back scanning the sand for sign of Jumbo, but there was none. The soft surface showed only my own boots, the feet of the monkey men and the tracks of wild animals. There was still no trace of him when at last I was standing by the pool on the far side of which were the two monkeys. Across that placid surface was the last spot where I positively remembered Jumbo at my heels. So, from somewhere between where I stood now and the other end of the water, a distance of only 80 yards, that faithful old dog had vanished into thin air. My eyes went to the little ledge running along by the water at the foot of the bank. A feeling of sick apprehension was churning inside me and every instinct was warning of what I should find when I went along that ledge. For 5 minutes more I stood still and listened to the jungle. Nothing was excited, all the birds were going about their business in a calm way, and from nowhere around me came the slightest sign that anything was wrong. What I needed to tell me the truth was monkeys, but when I scanned the trees again there was still not one in sight. Slowly I started towards the ledge by the side of the pool. Halfway along it I stopped. In the firm clay at my feet was the whole story, and it told me that Jumbo was dead. Almost at the water's edge was the single imprint of a leopard's paw. The pad had rammed hard into the clay with the toes wide cleft and the claws straining out. A little to the left of the pug a small patch on the ledge had been swept clean of the debris and dead leaves fallen from the trees above. From the swept patch the leopard had gone on along the ledge carrying Jumbo with his legs trailing through the dead leaves by the water's edge. Then, a few yards beyond the pool, Jumbo, still alive, had broken the leopard's grip and shaken free. For a few glorious seconds, for he was a fighting man, he had kept the leopard off. The sand here had been wildly churned by both the leopard's pugs and Jumbo's in what had been a short but furious meet. Then sheer brute force had driven Jumbo back against the bank where he had been seized again. From here the leopard had gone on down the nullah and then had bounded up the bank towards that rocky and difficult ground. I followed slowly, the trail made easy by frequent spots of blood. After climbing steeply for about 15 minutes I stopped. From a dense patch of scrub farther up the slope I had suddenly heard the leopard. I am not going to try to describe my feelings. All I can say, passing over the agony, is that a burning fury was urging me on to rush forward and stop those dreadful sounds by any means. But I fought the urge back. To rush forward now would probably send the leopard flying from the back of the scrub and leave him free to operate another day. It might have been very unwise, too, and no help to Jumbo now, to rush straight at an unsuspecting leopard on a fresh kill. Patience was the only thing. If I held my hand and waited I might get the revenge I wanted. When I had looked around me again I soon saw that I could get no nearer to the leopard without giving myself away. The ground was too difficult, the 50 or so yards I still had to climb before I stood the slightest chance were strewn with rocks and crackling leaves. The leopard had picked his spot with instinctive cunning and from no side could he be surprised. The only thing was to leave him where he was and then set a trap on ground of my own choosing. The morning by now was so hot that there was one place the leopard was sure to come to when he had finished. That place was the pool immediately below me. When he came down to drink, as he must, I could kill him from the other side of the nullah. With the greatest care I crept away from those heart-rending sounds, back down the rocks, then across the nullah and up the opposite bank where I found some cover to hide me. The leopard took his time. It was over half an hour before I heard him moving boldly on the hill, an animal unsuspicious of any danger. About halfway down he started to roll in the dead leaves, then he spent some time cleaning his claws, tearing them through the bark of a tree with sharp, plucking little jerks. All at once I saw him weaving through the trees at the foot of the high ground across the nullah, a comparatively small animal as his pugs had shown. When he reached the bank above the pool he paused and looked to his right and left. A moment later he came down the bank in a gracefully controlled slide to stand on the ledge beside the water. He gave me a beautiful broadside shot as he bent to drink with the points of his elbows sharp above his back. But I was a little too eager to see him dead and raised the rifle a shade too quickly. The leopard saw the movement from the corner of his eye. In a flash his head was up and looking straight towards me. As he braced for the spring that would take him away to safety, I snatched at the trigger. I heard the bullet strike and saw the leopard leap into the air. At the top of his jump he twisted and clawed for the bank. For one uncertain moment he hung there fighting for a hold with a blur of scrabbling paws. As I ripped back the bolt I thought he was going to drop, but with a sudden effort he was up and racing away through the trees. The bullet I sent after him hit a rock well behind his tail. Although the first shot had been poorly placed, he was nevertheless a badly wounded animal, and that mad rush would not take him far. Or so I thought, but when I went to look for him I sought in vain for over an hour. There was no sign of him anywhere about the spot where I thought he should have fallen, nor on the high ground was there any trace of his passing, and nowhere was there a single drop of blood. At last I came to the conclusion that I must have left him somewhere behind me, and so decided to go back to the beginning, the claw marks at the top of the nullah bank. From here, as I had seen before, his first wild rush had taken him about 100 yards. Then all trace of him was lost as the ground began to rise and became rocky. I started to search around the end of this trail again, and I had only been going for about a minute when I suddenly found a clue. Across the side of a rock was a heavy smear of blood. As I bent down to examine it I was wondering how I could have missed it the first time. But had I missed it? The rock had been catching the full rays of the sun for some time and was burning hot when I touched it. Now my follow-up had started more than an hour before, yet this blood was still wet and just beginning to trickle down the rock. Tvi walked right into it. As the thought hit me I froze beside the rock. The leopard had been here within the last few minutes and now was probably watching me from somewhere close by. Any sudden movement now might bring the enraged beast on top of me. He might come even if I did not move, but it was safer to stay crouched by the rock and let my eyes search as far as they could from under the brim of my hat. There was no sign of him in front of me, so fervently hoping that he was not somewhere close behind I started slowly to my feet. A few breathless moments later, after I had looked all round, the tension slackened. The sudden rush would have come before now if the leopard had been really near. It had been a nasty scare and I now started off much more cautiously. Not far from the blood-smeared rock a game path led towards the nullah. That was the way I thought the leopard would have gone. The heat now was like a furnace and a burning thirst had probably driven him back to the pool. I was, however, taking no more chances, for it was just as possible that he had moved on from the rock because he had heard me coming and might now be waiting in ambush somewhere ahead. As I moved slowly towards the pool I found more blood on the path. This certainly was the way he had gone and I doubled my precautions. Every bit of cover likely to conceal a leopard was now suspect indeed and had to be scrutinized carefully before going on. After I had stalked forward for another 100 yards the ground in front of me rose in a gentle fold before it rolled down to the nullah on the other side. If the leopard was planning mischief, just over the crest of that was a likely place for him to spring it. A little before the fold started to rise I left the game path and went 30 yards to the right of it. From this new position I began to creep up the slope as carefully as I could. At the top of it I paused with my finger on the trigger and my eyes everywhere at once. Suddenly I knew that the leopard was not here. Of that I was perfectly sure, for on one of the topmost branches of a koha tree almost above my head was a monkey. From where it sat it could take in a sizable piece of the surrounding jungle. Yet it was calm and quiet, and from the ground appeared to be dozing. That told me that no leopard was or recently had been anywhere near here, for if that monkey had caught even a glimpse of its spotted hide it would now be racing round the tree and screaming in high alarm. With the tension suddenly slackened and the leopard heaven knew where, I fished out a pipe. Why, I wondered as I filled it, had the leopard so abruptly changed his mind and avoided the nullah? The most probable answer was that he had either seen or heard me close behind him and had realized the danger of going down to the pool. If that was true, then he had for a certainty doubled back to the high ground. One thing, however, was sure, the leopard knew where I was and so it would be unwise to go back from my present position. The safest thing was to let him think I had lost his trail by going on to the nullah. Then, once I was by the pool and out of sight, I could fool him by working round to the high ground from behind. As I started towards the path leading down to the pool I was thinking again of Jumbo. Once more I was living through the agony of hearing the leopard at his meal. So it happened that as I reached the path, the memory of that ordeal was undoubtedly dulling my mind and in some odd way splitting it into two differently thinking parts. I was halfway down the path when I came abruptly into the deep shadow cast by the trees along the bank. Just beyond this and straight ahead of me was a patch of blinding sunlight and the dazzling reflection from the pool. The two together were so bright that for a moment I closed my eyes. When I opened them again, it seemed that one part of my mind showed me the spotted back of a leopard crouched half behind the root of a tree and a small bush on the path 6 feet ahead. At the same time the other part of my mind was assuring me that no leopard could be there while a monkey sat silent overhead. A little confused but nevertheless sure that this could not be a leopard, I walked on expecting to see that spotted back resolve into the litter of dead leaves it had to be. It was only one pace short of the bush that my confusion vanished when the full length of the leopard leapt into view. For a second that seemed eternity I looked down at him. Neither of us moved and for one brief moment I thought he was dead. But he was alive, and an instant later, with a snarl of rage, he reared up in a blur of flailing paws. I tried to leap clear and went crashing into the bank. As I fought to keep my balance, sharp claws raked down my left leg. I raised my foot to kick them off and the leopard's jaws snapped shut round the heel of my boot. I slammed it down with his head still clamped to it. But with my foot caught tight I lost the last of my balance and fell heavily to the path. Now he had me. A quick spring and the game was his. But he did not move. He might have been dead except for his furious eyes screaming hate into mine. I knew then that he was at his last gasp, but even though his strength was failing fast I could feel his jaws straining tighter round my boot. By now I had found and grabbed up the rifle. The next second I jammed the muzzle into his mouth and pulled the trigger. He died at once, but although I had felt the blast through my boot it was some little time before I had praised his fangs from the rubber heel. Reaction hit me as soon as my foot was free. I was trembling with shock and my heart was pounding at top speed while the deep claw marks down my leg were streaming blood. I should have liked to lie down beside the dead leopard, but before I could move a wild scream of terror ripped through the air. It came so abruptly and held such a chilling note that I was on my feet in a flash and grabbing for the rifle expecting I knew not what. All at once I remembered the monkey. It had to be that, for the scream had come from high above me. From where I was I could not see it through the leaves of the trees, but the scream had startled me so much that I began to run towards the top of the bank. Just as I reached it and was looking up, the scream came again and stopped me in utter amazement. What sort of monkey was this? Happy face, it didn't call at leopards and seemed so bad at climbing trees that it was about to fall off the one it was on, for it was hanging from a branch with its arms at full stretch and kicking its legs feebly in the air. Without warning the scream rent the air again. Then before my startled eyes the monkey let go its hold. It dropped like a stone, a sudden twisting flash of gray that hurtled down thumping from branch to branch until it hit the ground with a sickening thud 60 feet below. I was still surprised, but as I made my way down to it an idea was forming in my mind. The monkey had fallen by the water's edge with its face upwards, and one quick look was enough to tell me why it had not called at the leopard and why it had fallen off the tree. It was a young male monkey and it had been dying for hours. Its body was peppered with the shot from a muzzle-loading gun and it had been blinded in both eyes. It would have fallen from the tree in any case, but I believe that the sudden report of my shot at the leopard had so terrified it anew that it slipped from its perch. Then, weak from loss of blood and hanging over a 60-foot drop in a strange and frightening world of blackness and pain, well, who wouldn't scream, carrot? At last I slung the rifle and started to limp up the slope towards home. As I stepped out a whistle instinctively formed on my lips to call up Jumbo before I remembered. At the top of